You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
What a beautiful day for horses in the morning.
You are listening to the #1 horse podcast in the world. Here is your entertaining look at the horse world and the people in it.
I'm Julie Broadway, president at the American Horse Council.
And I'm Emily Stearns, Health, Welfare, and Regulatory Affairs Liaison with the American Horse Council.
And you are listening to our special monthly American Horse Council episode of Horses in the Morning on the Horse Radio Network for Tuesday, August the 6th, 2024. Good morning, Horse World.
It's time to hear from the American Horse Council in this monthly episode of Horses in the Morning.
Thank you so much for tuning in this morning. So if I had a nickel, Emily, for every person that calls the American Horse Council and says, I think maybe I should open my barn to boarders or board some horses in my pasture or whatever that looks like, it is one of the most common questions we get. Boy, I could retire. I'd be a rich person.
I could tell you that as a property owner, if I had a nickel for every time someone asked me if they could board their horse at my house, I would probably be just as rich as you would be.
So a couple of quick stats from the most recent National Economic Impact Study that I thought were relevant to this conversation. 43% of all horses in the U.S. live inside a structure of some type, and 57% live out in a pasture. Kind of an interesting side note. Also, we learned that 65% of horses are on small barns. They have less than 5 horses. 24% are in medium barns, which is 6 to 15 horses, or 11% are in large barns, which is 15 and beyond. And so it's quite interesting to me to see the different demographics and the different makeup of people who are contemplating this complicated, for me, this complicated decision about whether to accept boarders or not, or they're weighing that against whether there's possible income for them, but there's all these other conditions to consider. So, Emily, what do you want to add to that before we get to our guest?
I can tell you, as the horse wife of a not horse husband, he's staring at our empty stalls, probably wondering why they're empty and not earning us $500 a month. And I, as the horse person, am thinking, well, maybe I don't want to have other people's horses on my property.
Hey, I just listened to a great little presentation from Dr. Katie Flynn at the United States Equestrian Federation on biosecurity alone makes having other horses commingled with your own horses, Emily, complicated.
Yes, and I can tell you as the owner of a high vet bill dollar horse that the last thing I want to do is have to worry about one more thing.
Before we get to our guest today, we want to say today's episode is brought to you by Poplus. And from world-class equestrian facilities, race courses, exhibition buildings, and entertainment venues, the team at Poplus uses its world-renowned expertise in equine design to create some of the most recognizable, impressive equine experiences across the globe, from Churchill's Downs to Ascot Racecourse to the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, all the way to the Calgary Stampede. Poplus specializes in planning, design, and development of the world's foremost equestrian and livestock venues. So learn more about them by going to poplus.com. And a quick plug, I was just at a conference and saw them reveal the new rendering for Belmont. Oh, it is so lovely, folks. So stay tuned for that.
So our first guest today, I must admit, is a lovely friend of mine, Delia MacDonald. She is a longtime equestrian with a passion for quality care and continuing education. She's a graduate of Essex Agricultural, a mass licensed riding instructor, and a certified pressure-proof coach. She manages a private horse farm in Ipswich, Mass., along with competing her own horses and running her own lesson and training program. And I thought she might be good to join us today because she has been kind of a been there, done it all girl in terms of managing farms, managing different types of boarding setups, and someone's brain who we might really want to pick in terms of understanding what all there might be to boarding other people's horses at home.
we're going to sort of do this in a different kind of format than we normally do. We're going to let our two guests speak, and then we're going to do a little roundtable conversation. So their second guest is Julie Fershtman. She's an equine shareholder in Foster Swift's Southfield office, which is in Southeastern Michigan. She is a highly experienced in handling a wide variety of equine industry disputes through litigation and alternative dispute resolution, whether that be arbitration or mediation. And her extensive knowledge of the industry makes it possible for her to serve her clients with unparalleled efficiency and great results. And I can attest to that because I've heard her speak at lots of conferences. So I know she's a subject matter expert for sure. She drafts contracts involving numerous types of transactions with the goal of helping her clients avoid disputes, which is what we're trying to get at with this whole conversation today. For her years of expertise and success handling equine-related matters, she is widely recognized as one of the nation's leading equine law practitioners. Her clients are involved with all breeds and discipline, and she serves stables, industry professionals, associations, insurers, businesses, show management, trainers, equestrian athletes, clinicians, and individual horse owners across the country. So we're excited to have her give us all the logistics and the litigation aspect and the contractual part of this and the business acumen part of this. So Emily, I'm going to pass it back to you to get us going.
Yeah, so we thought we'd start with the practical before we move into the legal. And as Delia is here to join us as our hands-on boarding guru, Delia, I kind of feel like maybe we should start with the good about boarding other people's horses so we don't scare everybody off before we even start the podcast. So could you tell us what you feel like the most enjoyable or easiest part about boarding someone else's horses at home would be?
I think that the best part about bringing other people's horses, client horses, into your facility is just the ability to spend time with these other horses. I think we're all thinking about it because we love horses. We want to help horses. We want to help their people, that kind of thing. So you're able to develop really strong bonds with the good owners, with great horses. Maybe you get to experience breeds and disciplines you wouldn't have had before, just because a new horse comes into the barn, and there is a real social aspect to it too. I had horses in my backyard for years, and I had no horse friends around to do anything with. So bringing other boarders onto your property might mean you have someone to go trail riding with, someone you can call if there's an emergency and you're not there. If you think about like a small facility like yours, Emily, like bringing just someone that you trust to come in, that you know that there's an extra eye on the horses. But overall, it's just finding that joy in being around the horses. And I think that's what we love the most.
That's a great point, because for myself at home alone, currently when I'm riding, I'm texting my husband to make sure I'm not dead outside the window. But having that sense of kind of built-in community is really nice when you bring boarders home. So on the flip side of that, what do you think the hardest part about boarding someone else's horses are?
So I think the social aspect can be also that hard part too, because, if it's in your backyard and you say want to be having dinner, but people want you to come down to the barn, there's always that kind of thing that happens in a smaller facility, or not being able to say go away or find time to do other things because you're constantly being pulled into the barn for barn stuff. And then, not negative to the owner, but negative to like us, is that sometimes horses have to move on. And so you do develop attachments to certain horses that, have to move on either to a retirement facility, or maybe it wasn't the right fit for the owner. So now they've gone on to another home. That kind of minor disagreements about care can be an issue if you're not really clear when people come in, what you think is the standard versus what they think is the standard, that kind of thing.
I was just going to say, I can honestly add to what you said, that so many people don't think about the work-life balance aspect of this. Suddenly, your home is now also your business, and people want to be there when they want to be there, not when you want them to be there.
Yeah, exactly. And we think about the work-life balance being about the hands-on manure shoveling, but it's also about keeping those social relationships working, and maybe it's 7 o'clock and you want to be inside in your pajamas, but your boarder friend is now holding you up in the barn aisle chatting along, and you're just smiling, nodding along, kind of quietly, patiently, happily waiting for it to end. I say that as a fellow introvert.
So I guess the next question we have for you is, as a property owner, how would you decide how many horses to board? What factors come into play when you're thinking about that?
I think that on a base, I think people look like Emily was saying, like, oh, there's 3 stalls, so maybe I'll just board out those 3 stalls. But I think you really have to look at the whole picture. You have to figure, okay, I have 3 stalls open, but do I have 3 turnout spaces? What kind of turnout am I going to offer? My horses go out all day. So if I only have 1 open field, maybe I can only fill 1 stall, because what happens if the horse doesn't get along? He can't go into group turnout. Or if you have 1 medical paddock that you decide to use for a boarder, and now you have a horse who needs to be on small paddock turnout, that kind of thing. And then that work-life balance is, I kind of bounce between having 3 horses to 6 horses and back again, as Emily can attest to. And sometimes adding 2 more horses feels like you added 20 more horses, especially if it's just in your backyard and you're trying to go to work and come and do all these extra stalls. So figuring out how much time you have to do that extra labor and deal with the extra wear and tear on the property, like fences breaking, manure removal, paddock picking, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that time math. So for me, for deciding how many horses I want at home, it's however many I can take care of in an hour. I don't want my morning routine, my morning feed routine to go on longer than an hour. So I might have room for 8 more, but I only got time span for 3 more. And I don't want to be paying other people to have to take care of these horses. So that time allotment is really, really important, I think. So thinking about time, I think the big question comes into, my husband's looking at these $500, checks sitting in empty stalls. I'm looking at it thinking, we'll never make $500 a stall. So how do you decide what to charge when you're going to bring friends into your house?
Right. So this, I think, is the problem that a lot of people have when they bring horses in, and because they set a boarding price. We have to figure how much you guesstimate it's going to cost for the basic stuff that everybody thinks about: hay, grain, shavings. But then you also really need to consider how much is your insurance going to go up, things like manure removal, electricity, water, if you pay for city water, and all of those things kind of have to go in, and you have to figure out, okay, is it going to be worth it? Because you know how much it costs to pay for your own horses. So is it going to be the extra wear and tear on the paddocks? Is that, how much extra do you have to make? And then if you want to make a profit, you really need to figure out how much all that's going to cost, and then add to it however much profit you want to make for doing the labor in order to make it work. Because otherwise, I think a lot of us get a little burnt out because we think, oh, so-and-so down the street is charging $500, and then you charge $500 and you realize, well, it cost me $495 to pay for all of the stuff. And now I'm getting negative dollars to do all of the work. And so you want to make sure that when you start off, you know what the actual costs are going to be, at least roughly, so you can give a realistic price, because your time is valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting when people call and ask us, what's the average? I have to say there is none. It varies greatly. I mean, Emily's in New England. She can tell you the cost of boarding there is going to be dramatically different than the cost of boarding in Texas, So there's so many factors to take into account when you think about what you need to charge and, what's the going rate.
I say this as someone who loves to travel. If you are going to bring horses home and you're looking at that budget for how much you can charge, you need to account for farm sitting. I need to find someone to come watch these extra horses while I go to my mom's house or while I go on vacation. And we talk about burnout, work-life balance. That's something I need to account for when I'm looking at profit loss.
I totally agree with you. I can't say, Emily, how many friends I have that have horses at home that can't go and enjoy trips and go do some of the things they would love to do because they can't find adequate resources to help them, manage the boarders and their own horses that they have. So that takes me to the question of, is there a certain type of board that people should consider? I mean, is it retirement board, co-op, pasture, full board and training? What are the different avenues people should explore?
I think it really depends on what your end goal is. I mean, I think in our area, like in the Ipswich area, because of how much everything costs for the upkeep, probably if you were looking to make it your full-time job, you would have to think that training is going to be the thing that is going to help you bring in some more money. If you were looking just to fill that empty stall in your backyard and you only wanted one or two horses, obviously, probably one or two training horses isn't going to support you as a full-time job. So maybe that's not going to be the best fit. The situation with retirement is great if you can be there and if you're ready to be there at all hours and stuff. I think sometimes we all, even I thought, oh, when I retire, I'm going to run a retirement farm with all of the older horses. But any of us who have older horses know that they actually sometimes can require more of our one-on-one time. And a lot of times, if they're sent away to retirement, you're taking on that horse completely, the grooming and everything else. So I think it more has to do with how much time you feel like you have to invest in it and how much you want it to be a profitable business versus just having a couple of friends in the backyard for your horse so that they're not lonely, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I've always been a fan when we're talking about building that kind of social community. I love co-op board. That's been my favorite as a boarder. That's been my favorite as a manager. But co-oping for me has always been a really successful thing on kind of both ends.
Yeah, I think that if you can get a group of people that works like we've had in the past, then it's awesome, because then you have those people and that the owners are coming to see their horse too, which is also a big bonus. Sometimes if they don't need to be there and then something doesn't get seen right away because no one's got eyes on that horse, it's nice when you know that they have to come, a certain amount of days a week.
So thinking of all the kind of mini topics we just covered, if you were consulting for one of your clients who just bought a barn, bought a house with a couple stalls, and they were thinking of bringing other people's horses to the property, what research would you recommend for them to do before they decide whether or not to bring boarders home?
I think that first they would really need to look into what their liability is going to be if they bring more horses in. If in New England we have snow, so you have to think about that too. Like, for me, I would say, okay, am I going to get up in the morning and shovel out so that they can get in, or am I not going to be able to get up and shovel out so they can get in? And then looking around in the area and seeing what other people are doing for board. A lot of barn owners are really open to calling and talking about like what they offer versus what you offer. I mean, there was a farm up the street where she actually gave us a copy of her boarding contract just so I could look at it to compare to another boarding contract. So I think that reaching out to the resources in the area and seeing, what other people are doing and what the need is. And then once you decide that you want to do it, trying to make sure that the people that come in have really solid references, especially if they're coming to your house, where you actually talk to the vet, and you actually talk to the farrier, and if they can give you past references from other barns, stuff like that. If you're not in a situation where you word of mouth people, but those, from what I've seen, are the best boarders are the ones that it's the friend of a friend who, someone knows that horse and they know the horse, they know the story behind them, that kind of thing.
Yes. References, whether you're hiring a person or hiring a client.
Yeah.
So now we are a property owner. And after considering all the logistics and the work-life balance and all those other issues, still, I think I want to board some horses. So what legally do I need to consider? Our second guest is here to talk us through some of that. We'll start with some of that nitty-gritty stuff, and then we'll think about some common scenarios. So let's start off by thinking about this. So whether you are a young, eager equine industry professional who is looking for somewhere to rent part of a property, maybe some stalls, maybe some pasture, but you want to operate your own independent business out of this property, such as a small boarding stable, a riding lesson operation. You receive monthly rent and the professional will handle everything else. Or the second scenario is you want to make that extra little money that Emily was talking about that her husband's looking for. And it occurs to you that maybe you could board some horses on the side and you could charge some people for feed and pasture and maintenance, if you will. So you're trying to figure out how you're going to do this for the cash, if you will. So, Julie, start us off with some of the things that people should be mindful of if they want to go down this road.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me here. It's great to see we have Julie and Julie, among other friends here. It was mentioned, and I couldn't agree more, that the number one concern is liability. When a person decides that they want to take in a couple of boarders, or maybe several, for a little extra income, the mention was made that maybe the spouse is looking at a little extra of maybe 500 a month per stall. In my opinion, that's aspirational. Why? Well, when we talk about liability, there are so many things to consider. Let's just get to a couple of the most obvious ones, and that is this. Um, when you decide to open your property for business, you're going to be collecting board. Um, when you do that, your homeowner's insurance policy won't be there for you. The typical homeowner's insurance policy has a business pursuit exclusion right within it. And there's a reason for it. Come on, this is homeowner's insurance. This is not business insurance, and the policy reflects that. So you automatically have an exclusion on your policy almost definitely because of what would be perceived as a business pursuit. Some people say, well, I'll just keep my homeowner's insurance and nobody will know. And I'll keep my costs down because homeowner's insurance is so much cheaper than business insurance. The companies will learn, because if a claim is brought against you, the company will learn about the setting, will learn about the business. It can't be concealed. It'll come out. As an attorney with a lot of experience, 38 years, I know friends sue friends. Relatives sue relatives. I tried a case years ago of a nephew who sued his aunt because a horse got loose on her property and ran him over. This is just an example that people who are the best of friends going into the relationship will completely change as somebody gets hurt and a claim is brought and somebody's hurt. So getting back to liability, insurance is a problem. And that means for the aspirational hope of getting 500 a month, that would have to be a net 500 after the additional insurance is paid. And that would be a policy of either commercial general liability insurance. You'd talk about that with your insurance agent. Maybe you could purchase, depending on how you're running the business, equine professional insurance, probably not appropriate for a boarding stable, or talk to your agent about an incidental business endorsement. Let's say you have a side business, you tutor people, you have a location for a business of some sort, but this is your little side hustle. Maybe your insurance agent can fashion a policy for you. But liability and the accompanying insurance is such an important thing. I do want to emphasize something, and then we'll go back. There are 3 different avenues of liability. And one is the obvious. Your customers who are on the property. In the cold winter months in icy areas like my state of Michigan, for example, the law would say that if you have a business, even just a little business, and somebody slips and falls in your parking lot, the liabilities differ from a business standpoint than if you're just an average backyard property owner. Let me take a moment on that. Let's take you as the setting of inviting a friend over. It's not a business. You're inviting a friend to take a look at your horses. There's no money exchange, nothing of value. But your friend steps out of your driveway and slips and falls. If you are merely a backyard property owner, the law would expect you to only warn if you are aware of a hazard. You are aware of a slippery driveway. That's the law. So when the person slips and falls, you may have a great defense. You didn't know. Let's kick it up a notch. That person who's coming to your property, parking in your driveway, is boarding a horse and is coming to see their horse. They step out of the car and they slip. Suddenly the law looks at it differently. This is the law lawyers call premises liability. Now, because you are a business, small as it is, but a business, the law does expect you to make a reasonable inspection of your property and either warn of a hazard you know or make it safe. That means you have to make an extra effort in the cold winter, snowy, icy months to salt that driveway because it is a foreseeable thing. Somebody may get hurt. So the law looks at you differently. That's probably why you need extra insurance too. So the people are a problem or a risk. Then you have the injured horse. This is your property. What happens when a horse is backing into the stall? Maybe something occurs, backs against the wall, but you forgot to hammer down a nail and you have an exposed nail in that stall. Now the horse has either knocked into it, stepped on it, and a claim is made against you that you have a defective or dangerous premises, and the horse has been injured, vet bills, all kinds of expenses. The owner may come to you and say, "You're negligent. I want to be compensated." You can get insurance for that. That's care, custody, or control insurance. But if you don't have it, now you've got a horse coming after you, arguably. Finally, third parties. When you open up your barn to other people on the property with the addition of horses, well, you've got an additional risk. Somebody may get loose. Somebody may forget to latch the stall at night. Somebody may forget to shut the pasture. Now your horse or somebody's horse is going off into the road, causing a collision that could be fatal. You've got an elevated risk of third parties being hurt. Great reason to have insurance for sure, and maybe even to require the horse owners to have personal horse owners insurance as well. I think you get the idea here. We're talking about elevated risks that you would never have to deal with if all you did was care for your own horses. But now you've stepped into these risks because you're a small boarding facility. How's that for fun?
Wow, that's so much to process there, Julie. Okay, so let's say I'm still game to do this. So, what do you do to protect yourself? You talked about the insurance piece. I know some places I've boarded horses, they made me sign contracts. I mean, it was a big deal to make certain, and I had to sign some waivers, and there was all kinds of paperwork involved. I remember that. I thought I was signing up for a mortgage kind of thing. Talk a little bit about what's involved there.
Let's talk about it from the standpoint of the facility that's going to be boarding. And the facility, when I use that term, you think of, wow, the big stable. No, I'm talking about the small operation. A couple of things to think about. We've already talked about insurance. Clearly talk with your insurance agent and decide if the cost of the added insurance is going to make this venture worth your effort, worth your time. It may not be profitable. So that's one thing. Next is the Equine Activity Liability Acts. We know, and Julie knows from the Horse Council very well, 48 states around the country have some form of an equine activity liability act. They all differ, and there are strange outliers out there, like the state of Connecticut. Arizona's is different, but many of them follow a pattern. And the pattern that many of the states of the 48 have is that if you are an equine activity professional, and that might include a boarding stable, you are required to post warning signs. If you are just a backyard horse owner, most of the laws say no signs for you, but you can put them up if you feel like it. But as an equine professional, and a stable really likely would qualify, time for you now to post those Equine Liability Act warning signs that comply with the statute. And in your contracts, get to that in a moment, the law in many of these states says if you use contracts, you must include certain language. In the state of Ohio, for example, it's a whole big long list of risks. Other states, I think it's Iowa, requires a list of risks and a warning notice like you see on the signs. Other states, it's the same stuff you see on the signs, but you would be required to include that if you use contracts, or in some states, Arizona, for example, you must use contracts. Same with Virginia. So your contracts would need that extra effort. And a warning to people who say, well, I'll just go online and I'll get a form from somebody out in California. Nice start, but California has no Equine Liability Act. You won't find the warning language there. So watch out. And that means if you want your contracts drafted by a lawyer, you may have to hunt down a lawyer licensed in your state who has the expertise to draft the contracts. And then that adds to your expense. Elements of contracts, happy to get into them. What do you think?
So I just want to say one quick side note. Julie's heard me speak about this at a lot of conferences. Not all signs are created equal. The sign that you purchase has to be specific for your state. Don't go on Amazon and say, I'm going to save myself a few dollars and I'm just going to buy a generic sign. No, that doesn't work. You have to have the correct sign, because if somebody decides to pursue you legally, that's going to be a factor in how your litigation plays out, is whether or not you had all the appropriate things in place and with the right language from whatever state or local municipality that you're being covered in. So Emily, just
yeah,
out
I
of
was just gonna
curiosity.
say, this is a really good reminder that I need to get my New Hampshire sign for my New Hampshire farm, that I've been staring at for a year now, reminding myself I should probably get my equine liability sign. So if you're like me out there, go get yours after you listen to this.
With regard to contracts, though, there's so much to consider. I would like to add about the signs. Even if you buy a sign today that is compliant with your state's equine liability law, just a warning, these laws have been changing. And in Kentucky, for example, its law began as an Equine Activity Liability Act, as did many of them, but it morphed into a Farm Animal Activity Liability Act, and the signs changed. So those who did business with the old signs would need to update their signs. So just a word of encouragement to make sure that your law didn't change. And a great way to find out, you can easily go online and check out the legislative records for your state to determine if the law is changing. It's amazing how they are. Example, I wrote a book in 2019, the American Bar Association published it, and I included at the end all of the warning sign requirements and language requirements, but even some of them have changed, and that was just a few years ago. So warning signs and language in your contracts do change. But in terms of boarding contracts, we could go on and on about it. Let's talk about the things that really matter to you. Clearly, your spouse, who is hoping for some net money to come to you from this arrangement, is going to look for documents or portions of the contract about payment. I get calls a lot from people who are boarding stables and they don't have a contract. They claim they haven't been paid, but their monthly payments received have never been consistent in terms of when, amount. You can avoid that by putting in the contract how much the board is, when it is due, how it is to be paid. And it's kind of cool these days. Stables are taking payment by Venmo and Zelle and all these easy payment things, even credit cards. But how it's due, when it's due. Another thing stables have looked for is what they can do when they don't get paid. Sometimes a contract can specify interest on unpaid balances. Follow your law. What's legal in your state may not be in another. You can put that in. Will there be a late payment fee? Up to you. Boarders hate them, but can't hurt to put it in there. Specifying the amount of board and all these details is very helpful if you ever have to go to small claims court to collect your board. Now it's clear as to what it was meant to be. And if you receive cash, strong recommendation, give the person something, whether email, text, to acknowledge that you got it so that there's a record of what you got. Health of incoming horses is a really important thing. If you've got your own barn of your own horses, but somebody you don't know well wants to be a boarder, how do you know that their horse isn't harboring an illness? How do you know the horse hasn't been recently exposed to strangles or something? You can put in your contract promises about the health of the incoming horse, maybe even ask to see current veterinary records, proof of vaccinations. That's important for not just your horses in the barn, everybody's horses in the barn. One other thing I'd like to share, emergencies. This is a problem that happens. The boarder can't be reached. Even in the age of cell phones, you can't find them, but their horse is colicking and in need of massive veterinary attention right now. What do you do? You're the boarding stable, you can't find them. Your contract can address it, and it can talk about what to do. My preference is a provision that says if there is an emergency, the boarder gives you, the stable, discretion to do whatever you want, and you're acting as the agent of the boarder to get the vet attention. Certainly, too, you'll want your contract to say if the horse has mortality insurance, you'll call the insurance company. But if it's an uninsured horse, you can now summon the vet. You can even require that the boarder keep a credit card on file with the vet. Not a bad idea. Vets like that too. But how you will handle emergencies is great so that when the boarder comes back from the vacation and tries to find their horse, but the horse was euthanized, there's an understanding as to what led up to that. It gets worse if the insurance company won't pay on the horse because they didn't get notice. All of these things can be avoided when the boarder tells you who their insurance company is. Here's the 1-800 number to call, gives you full authorization, obviously working with the insurer, to make a decision on what to do with the horse in the owner's absence. Maybe even list somebody else who can be contacted if an emergency like this occurs. I also like a release in the boarding contract protecting the stable involving the horse, because the release you may have, that standalone separate document for people to sign of legal age when they're on your property, probably doesn't say anything about releasing the stable from the consequences of negligence or liability for the horse. So I think that's a great thing for stables to put in. Two other quick things I thought would be helpful. Damage to the facility. That happens. The boarder can can cause damage. The horse can. You can put in the contract as to whether it's the cost of doing business, the stable will pick it up, or whether the boarder pays, or something in between, and also termination. How do we end this? How much notice do we need to give each other? Is there a reason the stable can give less than the usual notice? Maybe there's an emergency. Maybe this horse is such a holy terror, he's threatening everybody, chasing people down with his ears pinned back, swinging his rump, testing people's safety. Maybe the stable wants the right to terminate less than the usual 30 days. So these are just some ideas.
One of the questions we get the most often at the Horse Council is someone calls us and said, I've opened my barn to boarding and my boarder has not paid me. Can I claim this horse and turn around and sell it? What are my options here for lack of payment? I'm out a lot of money because I've been feeding this horse on my own dime for a while now.
Julie, that is an excellent question, and it is an ongoing problem that I really think can be avoided with good contracts. And the issue comes down to this. Nationwide, just about every state has a stableman's lien law. Some states, like mine, call it an agisters, A-G-I-S-T-E-R-S, lien law. And that law addresses what happens if a stable isn't paid. Unfortunately, people in the horse industry don't know about these laws, and I can't even count how many people have bought a horse from a stable because they have just outright sold it for non-payment, but they didn't follow the law. So now the owner of the horse, who paid good money, can't get the horse registered because the owner, the former registered owner, won't sign off on a transfer, and they want papers on the horse. Sometimes the former owner has sought me to sue to get the horse back. Of course, they generally don't want to go the distance. It's not an easy lawsuit to bring. The takeaway for everybody is, if you are a stable that has a horse in your barn and you have not been paid, look to the remedies that your contract allows you to follow. And it may only say you will pay attorney fees and you will pay interest, but then look to your state's stableman's lien law, and you will find these laws vary massively around the country. Example, some states say that if you, the stable, would like a lien on that horse, giving you the right to hold it, you have to go to court first and beg the judge to give you a lien to permit you to maintain the horse until you're paid. Some states, like my state, and I'm in Michigan, say that the minute you take in a horse from someone else, you have a lien automatically by law. You don't even have to touch it, feel it, see it. It is yours, and you can insist on the horse being there until you're paid. The laws also differ on when you can go the distance and foreclose on that lien. Example, some states require you to go to court, have a hearing, trial. Other states make it much easier. It's an expensive ordeal regardless, but I'm hoping anybody who has a non-payment situation looks to the law of your state, because they vary and it may be more effort than you think. Good idea to have a contract with an attorney fee clause, so that maybe if you have to go find a lawyer in your state to follow the law, get the horse back, or allow you to sell the horse and get your money, your legal fees might get paid by the other side. And the laws also deal with what happens if you get lucky. The horse gets sold, you are able to sell the horse off, you the stable, but the debt was only $6,000 and you've collected $12,000. The state laws talk about who gets the windfall. All of that is covered by the statute.
Awesome. Wow. There's so much more to this than I even possibly imagined.
I'm taking notes for all the reasons I can point to my husband about why my little introvert self doesn't need to have borders on the property. He'll want all the legal ramifications, I'm sure. But I'm also laughing. So just having been on the receiving end of issues that can go with having a border, and I say this in full disclosure of having an off the track thoroughbred, being on the giving end of being a horrible border. Going back to contracts. So having that horse, and I think Delia can probably speak to this a little bit too, even if it's just between friends. And the horror story I'm thinking of is I was boarding at my friend's house. It was just me and just her. And they lived on the corner of a busy street. They had this beautiful field, and my thoroughbred loved to open the gate and leave and go stand in the street. So then now I am the bad boarder, right? And I fully own up to that. But having the contract is really important, because I think contracts don't just save you as a business owner, but it saves friendships too, because you both have set expectations and they hold you both as the boarder and the manager to those expectations. And I'm pointing out Delia because Delia, I feel like, I've co-opted with you. You've co-opted with a lot of other people you consider friends. How have contracts really helped in those situations?
I think that I love contracts because I like everything to be really clear. And especially if you're bringing someone, even if it's a friend, like I have, sold horses with friends before. And even though it was my best friend, we sat down and we went over everything that could possibly happen, why I had the horse in training. It was all written out. If he got hurt, who would pay, the percentage I would get depending on when the horse was sold. And even though that was my best friend, I think that made the difference. And that's why that was someone I could help sell horses and stay friends with after. And when it comes to boarding, it's the same thing, because sometimes, as we all know, if you've been a boarder, some barns will change blankets for you. Some barns don't change blankets. Sometimes, your horse has to be on a different type of grain, and that causes an issue. So when you, as a boarding facility, can go down and say, okay, these are the things that I am going to give to clients. These are the things that I think that as part of my day-to-day care, and I'm always going to do these things. And then the flip side, these are the things that the clients are going to really need to be responsible for. Like, I'm going to fly spray your horse, but you need to make sure you have fly spray. Some barns will make the appointments for the farrier and the vet, and some barns, it's up to you to do it. If they're going to have a shot clinic and you don't want your horses involved in the shot clinic because you use a different vet, then that's fine. But in the contract, it has to say, okay, but you need to have your spring shots done by this time. I need copies of all your paperwork. The last 3 barns I've been at, we do fecals twice a year, being really clear with clients when they come in, we're going to do fecals, and we're doing them twice a year because we have a 0 worm count in the property and we want to keep it that way. So I think just knowing what you expect that you're going to be able to do, and that you want to have your standard of care and what you expect from them as clients, and just being as clear as possible and having it written out. Because sometimes you might say, oh, I'll put the bell boots on. And then next thing you know, they're like, well, you told me you would change the blanket twice a day and put 3 different types of boots on.
And I think too, as the horse owner, having that contract, so it's pretty easy for yourself then to recognize where maybe it's not working for you as a boarder, right? So my horse that kept escaping, I didn't need to wait for my friend to tell me this situation was causing her horrible anxiety. I could just look at our contract and say that my horse is creating an unsafe situation, and it's better if I go somewhere else. And we left things very well, and now we're still best friends. And I really think that's only because we had a good contract and we knew what the expectations were for each other. So just because you're going to a simple little backyard barn with your friend, or you're leasing out a couple stalls for retirement, those contracts really have a lot more power than just making sure you're legally covered.
I'm just going to add real quickly. I've boarded at several different facilities, and you've made an outstanding point, both of you, about the level of detail you should go to. I can say at one facility, I did not know, it wasn't specified in the contract, that they were going to add a laundry charge. So when they washed blankets a couple times a year, then this fee appeared. And I'm like, what did I sign up for here? When I lived in Vermont and I boarded there, I loved the place I boarded at. But the first winter, I had a fuel surcharge because they heated the barn so that if we came to ride, we would be comfortable, which I was happy to pay because it's cold in Vermont in the winter. But it came as a little bit of surprise. So all of those little nuances, not to drill down into the weeds, but those become important things, especially to keep positive relationships between boarder and boardee.
The horse world is small. You do not want to be burning any bridges because you brought your friend to your house.
Yeah, indeed.
And keeping good relationships is so important. That's the fun, I think. When you have a horse, of course, the time with your horse, but it's this really great community. I know that boarding stables have cringed when I've recommended it, but I'm going to throw it out. I'm a big believer in an attachment to the boarding contract where the boarding stable says, these are my side charges. I will only impose them if they're utilized. And there's something at the bottom that says we have the right to update this with 30 days notice. Examples can include, what if you have a hard keeper horse, an off-track thoroughbred that needs a lot more grain than the other guys? The standard board fee may not work. So there's the ability to charge extra for the horses that need the extra amount of feed. Holding the horse for the vet or farrier. A lot of boarders say that's a service the stable's supposed to provide. Well, maybe not. And the boarding contract can say this is not a standard service, but if we do it, this is what we're going to charge you. That usually gets the boarders buddying up to get a friend to hold the horse for someone else. But these are just some examples of things that the stables can impose. And then when invoices go out, those invoices can be consistent. Another example I've been asked to put in contracts is blanketing and unblanketing. That's a tough one, but some boarders would think the stable should do that. You get the idea. Some stables say that takes an effort. Some boarders want bell boots, splint boots put on the horses for pasture and paddock time. All of that, if it's important, can be put in. That'll avoid misunderstandings and hopefully keep the stable a little more profitable.
So now that we've talked about all this, I'm confident that some of you are out there saying, oh, this is why I don't want to board horses. And others of you are saying, oh, you've crushed all my hopes and dreams of being able to make a little side money and board. So let's go back to both of you and say, again, in case people missed it at the start, what are the most enjoyable parts about boarding horses that you'd like the audience to take away as the positives from this conversation?
Well, I think that for me, it really is the relationships, the relationship with the horses. We all love horses, and, some of us maybe can only afford to have one, and then you could bring two more horses into your life that you can fill with joy for having and caring for them. And then getting that relationship with other people, make new friends. You can go, we have equine affair here, so like a group of us will go to equine affair together. It's having people to cheer you on, pushing you to ride more. When I had the horses in my backyard and we didn't have any clients, it was a little harder for me to push myself to get out there and ride in the afternoon after I'd worked all day. But now I have them at a big facility, and I get there, and even if I don't maybe feel like riding when I get there, as soon as you see other people riding, it just makes you, you want to get on, you want to ride, you want to truck out and go to trail ride. So I think there is a lot of positive. You just really have to have a really good plan getting into it.
Awesome. Julie, you want to add anything?
I think it's the element of trust. If you really have confidence in the stable that you're entrusting your horse with, that degree of trust and the fulfillment of that trust by the stable, by doing all of the services on time, feeding on time, watering on time, calling the owner when there's a slight issue, gee, your horse seemed to be a little off today. You may want to come in. It's that trust and that expectation that the stable has the best interest of your horse that I think is is great because, in my experience, most boarding stables care so much about the horses. They're going to live up to that trust, and they're going to be really helpful for the off-premises owner. Let's face it, in today's world, most owners can't come out every day, and you really are relying on that stable. So I'm so happy to see that people who get into the business of boarding, the overwhelming majority of them, are doing it for the right reasons. I'd like to add a comment in regard to one thing that could absolutely stop the arrangement in its tracks, and that is zoning. Local ordinances may forbid anybody from having a business, even a small horse boarding business, on the property. And that may be a deal killer. So I'm cautioning anybody with an interest in taking in a few horses for a few extra dollars to check your local ordinances to determine if it is forbidden to have a business involving horses or anything. You can find that information pretty easily online.
That goes for the number on your horses, number of horses on your property too, Julie, right? I know in towns I've lived in, they limit the number of horses, not just if you can run a business.
Absolutely. And we don't think about that. The small operation typically never runs afoul of it. But you are right. You'd want to look at a few ordinances. You'd want to look at ordinances involving the keeping of large animals, the volume of animals you can have per acre or per facility. There may be other actually ordinances that even deal with businesses and things that you have to do if you want to be a business. So a little bit more work to do there.
Awesome. Thanks, both of you, so much for all of this great information. We're going to provide their contacts in our show notes, so look for that when we post this episode. So thank you both so much, ladies. Our legislative update for this episode is brought to you by Piranha. Whether on the back of a horse or at the barn or watching from the sidelines, there is nothing more annoying than a flying insect, whatever kind of bug it might be. Family owned and made in the USA, and with over 50 years of experience, you can count on Piranha, your trusted leader in insect control, to keep those pests at bay. So Piranha, it works.
For our legislative update, it's actually more of a regulatory update. And we've talked before about the differences between regulatory and legislative issues, but this is coming straight out of the EPA. And what's happening is, on a regular basis, the EPA reschedules, which means they reevaluate access to different products such as rodenticides, rat poisons, rat baits, and pesticides and insecticides. So for us, the item they are currently looking to reschedule or re-register that's of concern to us is pyrethrins, which is the #1 ingredient in most of our fly sprays and fly deterrents. This includes your barn misters. This includes what you're using to deter ticks. It's ingredients in your tick tubes around your property, and in different topical products we put on our horses to keep them comfortable in the summer. So what this means is we might lose access to pyrethrins unless we can make our case to the EPA about how important it is that horses are able to use this in our fly spray. So what we've done is we have put together a survey about fly spray and different topical items you are using for your fly spray to keep your horses comfortable in the summer. And we'll post this survey on in the show notes as well as on our social media. And we'll keep it open through about mid-August for those of you listeners listening as this premieres in the first week of August. And we want to try to get as many responses as possible all across the country so we know how you're using fly spray products, and if we lose access to pyrethrins, what that means for your access to different products and how you can keep your horses comfortable.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll provide more numbers and links in our show notes. We invite you to support our beloved industry and join the American Horse Council and earn a free subscription to our monthly newsletter, which shares the latest in all of our legislative and regulatory happenings, both at the federal and state level, as well as information that we think horse owners really need to know.
So you can follow the American Horse Council on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. And you can also subscribe to this podcast's RSS feed. You can subscribe to Horses in the Morning on any podcast player and find all the shows, including ours, on the Horse Radio Network at horseradionetwork.com.
And as we like to say, we are #here for horses and all you barn owning folks out there. Thanks for listening.